Why would American soldiers be deliberately exposed to chemical agents, as David Martin tells us, to practice for what might be the inevitable?
It's a vicious catch-22. A war to rid the world of Saddam Hussein and his weapons of mass destruction could trigger the use of those weapons against American troops. He has huge stockpiles of chemical agents like sarin and VX, by some estimates enough to kill every single person in the world. Are American soldiers prepared to protect themselves against this most horrendous of weapons? To find out, we went to a heavily guarded U.S. Army base where the motto is, "We've got the nerve." It's the only place in America where soldiers are routinely exposed to deadly nerve agents.
Everybody stand perfectly still. They are going to lay their agent down.
The United States has sworn never to use chemical weapons. But that's real live nerve agent those men in rubber smocks are dispensing with their syringes in a room filled with young recruits. One drop is enough to kill everybody in the chamber in minutes.
Being very careful. Once you have a sample, go ahead and step back.
The purpose of this drill is to detect exactly which kind of agent they're dealing with.
All right, what do you got?
I got nerve.
Very good.
But the aim is to convince young soldiers that they can be exposed to these agents and survive. Each year, 5,000 servicemen and women go through the Army's Chemical Defense Training Facility at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri. They've been through 17 weeks of training to get ready for this. I enlisted for just one day to experience firsthand what it's like to be exposed to nerve gas. We're all privates here, and we're all tense.
So they say the motto here is, "We got the nerve." Do you think you got the nerve?
I believe so, sir.
I believe so.
We'll find out.
You a little nervous?
Sir, yes, sir.
I think that's a good thing. I'm nervous.
Sir, it's a good thing, sir. We're all nervous, I believe.
They might be even more nervous if they knew how likely Saddam Hussein is to use chemical weapons. If they knew what Charles Duelfer knows after spending 7 years as the deputy director of the UN inspectors in Iraq.
Well, I came to understand, really about 1995, just how important these weapons were seen as key to the survival of the regime.
During the first Gulf War, Saddam ordered his military to load chemical warheads on Scud missiles and even told them to fire if he was about to be driven from power.
In my conversations with senior Iraqis, they say that the order was given to disperse these weapons, and they pre-delegated the authority to use them, so they say, to their military commanders under certain circumstances.
Did the U.S. know where these weapons were?
No. The pre-delegated authority applied to weapons that had been hidden in 5 locations, none of which were bombed.
So all that bombing, and he still had the capability to launch chemical weapons against the U.S.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the Iraqis are very good at hiding things.
So good that Duelfer and his inspectors didn't find those weapons until 4 years after the war, and then only because the Iraqis finally told them where to look. The Iraqis also told Duelfer why they had gone to such great lengths to hide them. Chemical weapons are the crown jewels of their arsenal. When Saddam was fighting for his survival against Iran back in the 1980s, he fired off tens of thousands of chemical rounds to save his regime, killing or injuring more than 20,000 people. A few years later, the Iraqis told Duelfer, those same weapons saved the regime again when the U.S.-led coalition liberated Kuwait and was poised to march on Baghdad.
They were convinced that a strong element of President Bush the Elder's decision not to go to Baghdad was because that the United States knew they had chemical and biological agent and would use them if they proceed to Baghdad.
Without these weapons, Saddam is history.
So they've got 2 key data points where these weapons have preserved the regime.
Never mind that none of the histories of the Gulf War say that chemical weapons stopped the first President Bush from going to Baghdad. All that matters is what Saddam and his generals believe. And from their point of view, weapons of mass destruction are the great equalizer against an overwhelming force.
If you want to tie up your enemy's strength, if you want to tie up his reserves, if all of a sudden a lot of his frontline troops are sick, they've got to be treated. It certainly is a morale breaker if they find that something they can't see, they can't hear, and they can't particularly defend against is in the environment.
The Army tries to create that environment at this school, but it's only a pale version of what actual chemical warfare would be like. For one thing, there are strict limits on how long a soldier can wear these hot and heavy suits, which are lined with charcoal to keep the chemicals out.
I would say 4 hours probably would be the max that you would want to have on that protective suit in that situation.
And, says Sergeant Sean Chernis, one of the instructors and a veteran of the First Gulf War, there are no timeouts in combat.
If you're in a chemically contaminated environment, there's no getting out of your chemical gear.
But your ability to fight must just...
It decreases. And that is one of the things with chemical warfare that the enemy does like, is it degrades the ability for the soldiers to fight and the effectiveness of the soldiers.
These soldiers are about to get a taste of how it feels to be under chemical attack, but it's done under carefully controlled conditions. First, your blood is tested.
Are you nervous about this?
You're not nervous about the needle,
More about the needle than the nerve agent? Well, that's okay. This will be over in just a minute.
Then your blood pressure is taken. Mine was much higher than normal. Then your gas mask is fitted to make sure of a tight seal. You're in the hands of sergeants who work with nerve agents every day of the week. But that doesn't change the fact that you could die a very unpleasant death.
Right up here.
Headache, dizziness, confusion, and nausea. Hot, dry skin, seizures, loss of consciousness, lack of pulse. The lack of pulse is not good for you, boy.
We are anxious, scared, uptight, pick your word. Sergeant Brad Koland has seen it before.
Anxiety, sometimes fear. Just depends. Each individual's different.
Can you tell when somebody walks into that room for their first briefing whether they're not just unsure but terrified?
You can pick out if a student needs to have a little bit more special attention. I'll use you as an example. You are a reporter, you should be talking all the time, but you were the quietest student in the entire classroom. So I specifically spent time with you to help ease your fears, or your anxiety, whichever the case may be.
Well, we can call it fear.
There's only one way to conquer this fear.
Here we go.
You have socks, you have underwear.
A trained soldier is supposed to be able to put all this on in 8 minutes flat. An untrained civilian takes forever, even with the help of a sergeant.
I'm getting there.
Before we go into the hot zone, we go outside for a dry run. We go through all the moves we'll make inside, but with the clown-sized boots and thick rubber gloves, it's slow and clumsy going. And the temperature inside this gear goes up 10 to 15 degrees. So an 85-degree day is its own kind of hot zone, and you can't wait to get that mask off.
So those procedures seem very simple. This is not brain surgery going through there. The question is, can you remember to do all that when the only thing you can think about is the real nerve agent? Out here it was just practice, so we'll see.
There's one last stop before the hot zone, a chamber where the instructors spray a noxious but harmless chemical in your face. If you don't choke, you know your mask is working.
Follow me, let's go.
Cameraman David Gladstone, also dressed in full chemical gear, is going with us. There's never been a camera in this room before, so these pictures are unique.
But what type of agent do we have here? VX, right? Victor.
VX paralyzes your nervous system in 3 to 5 minutes if a drop hits your skin. Saddam Hussein is believed to have more than 400,000 pounds of it. He also has stockpiles of sarin gas, which gives off a deadly vapor. Slips of litmus paper help us identify exactly what agent we're faced with. We call sarin Golf and VX Victor. For a moment there, I can't tell them apart.
Okay, that looks like golf. Say again? Golf. Gonna go with golf? Just wait a second.
I'll go with Victor.
Okay, very good. Go ahead.
The difference is crucial because sarin dissipates quickly in the air. VX remains lethal for hours.
Is Victor a persistent or non-persistent agent? Who said persistent? Very good.
Persistent means you have to decontaminate anything it's touched, scrubbing it down with bleach and water. Can you imagine doing this in the middle of a war? A study done by the Marines after the first Gulf War found it would take 20,000 gallons of water to decontaminate one battalion, about 800 soldiers. Finding enough water in the desert was almost impossible. And there's another problem, which makes solving all those other problems that much harder.
Felt like my IQ decreased by about 50 points as soon as I went in there.
That happens to a lot of people, yes.
All the stuff you just were told an hour ago outside suddenly go out of your head.
You put your mask on, and a lot of people get tunnel vision. They see straight ahead. You can't see side to side real well, and so they are just in they get in the zone.
Which is probably why I make such a mess of administering an atropine shot to restart the heart of a dummy supposedly stricken by nerve agent.
There you go. Don't put your hands in front. From the bottom. Everything's from the bottom. Slide it off. Set it down. Check your injection site. Be careful not to stick yourself. There you go. From the bottom and the back. Back here. No, get your hands away from that green tube. Look, pay attention. You can't touch this. It will go through your hand. From the bottom and the back of the needle.
I come within a hair of sticking myself with the needle, and a hole in my glove would expose me to the nerve agent.
From the bottom and get your hands away from the tip of the needle. From the bottom and the back.
Very important. We don't want you to hurt yourself.
No, you got to take it off the clip. See that clip?
My excuse is that the rest of these privates have just completed 4 months of training. Training only 1 out of every 30 soldiers in the Army goes through. Chemical warfare is such nasty business, it's a badge not every soldier wants to have. But if it ever happens, these are the soldiers who will have to hold their units together.
How you feeling there?
You're the only one in your unit, probably, that has gone through this training. You're going to have to convince that mechanic. You're going to have to convince that cook. You're going to have to convince that office worker that this mask works in a toxic environment.
When you hit the showers, you know something most soldiers don't. The equipment works. It will protect you.
Do you have more confidence in the equipment that you wore yesterday?
I do.
Would you go through it again?
I would. But ask me how good I am at all of that, those procedures. You saw how many mistakes I made yesterday. Was there anything I did right?
You took your shower correctly.
Thank you.
American soldiers, at least some of them, have the training, and they have new, lighter-weight chemical suits that are rolling off the assembly line at a rate of 500,000 a year. But Saddam has the weapons, and this time the U.S. is planning to go all the way to Baghdad. Bottom line, if he thinks it'll help, he'll use them.
If he thinks it'll help preserve his interests and preserve himself, there's no reason why he wouldn't.